don't accept that approach, and we calculate a sustainability index for these 30 companies as a mandatory approach. It is one way of approaching integrated reporting. But we should think that the ecosystem, the companies are segmented as big companies, medium companies, and small companies. And big, medium, and small concepts differs from one company to another, from emerging markets to developed markets. So if you have to be successful in an approach, you should take your steps very carefully. Otherwise, you may be disappointed about the final outcome.
You could still, like, just add on. Well,
this way.
anyway,
Robin, can you pass that?
Just as a short add-on, there are other ways to do it. The special section, yeah, for companies.
For instance, you mean?
Yeah, for companies that do good integrated reporting. Yeah, whether they're big, medium, or small. Or you could award a star rating to the ones. You see, inducing instead of regulating, but make it really attractive. Because otherwise, companies will sort of come and go. And they will say, yeah, very nice, good idea. They come with their glossy brochures where the lady of the chairman opens the kindergarten. That is of no help to us investors.
Great, thank you, Christian. Can we?
There we go.
Thank you. I'm Charles Anderson. I'm the Director of the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative. We are a public-private sector partnership between the financial sector companies globally and the UN. I'd just like to pick up on the point of two things really. Speed is really of the essence. You know, we cannot be sitting around waiting for the world to catch up on these issues. You know, the environmental imperative is so strong now that I wonder if we can really wait long enough for a whole generation of business leaders to actually understand that the integrated approach is for the benefit of everybody. We'll be waiting, in my opinion, quite a long time for that to happen. And I just wonder, the speed issue seems to me to push you more down a mandatory approach rather than a voluntary one. The other is that, in favour of a mandatory approach, is that large investors are universal these days, and they have been asking for quite a long time for there to be a way of investing universally on a level playing field. And if in each individual market there is a range of approaches on mandatory versus voluntary, you're going to end up with a very muddled global position for universal investors, which makes it very difficult for them to evaluate their portfolio impacts, because you will have a hodgepodge of approaches, and only some of their investments will be governed by this code. So I think that suggests another, that you should be working together for a joined up and more mandatory approach. And I do recognise that actually the response to mandatory requirements can be quite weak. People can tick the boxes and do what's necessary, but at least starts to get a level playing field laid down quickly that then can be built on. So that's my view on that point.
That's a great point. It's a great point, Charles.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
I support that view that indeed investors' pickup is very important for making these things happen. Investors indeed want to have that global, easy comparison they can make over countries. They're more universal, and for investors, I believe it will become more important to be involved, like we are already in the ILC, but also in other bodies. It will become more important to be involved in standard setting. And that may also reach out to other areas. And in that, I think it's also important that we convey, as investors, that message that we also have with integrated reporting, that it's more about value creation beyond just the financial terms.
Great. Thank you. I think there is another point there, but actually Robin here, you wanted to add also to the mandatory point. Gentleman just in front. Are you on this message? Okay, last two on this point, and then we'll move on.
My name is Robin Edmey. I'm the chair of the, and sorry, it's not a very sexy name, the group of friends of paragraph 47 of the Rio Plus 20 final declaration. That paragraph urges the governments, not only the governments, but to promote corporate sustainability reporting. I do appreciate that there is a difference when you talk about integrated reporting, but to some extent we do discuss the issue of integrated reporting. It's a purely state-led initiative. There are 4 countries from Latin America, there are 5 European countries, states, there again, and there's South Africa, and we hope to have Morocco on board next year. Just on the, obviously, on the mandatory side, I just need to make short intervention. By the end of the year, we're going to issue a case study comparing 5 public policies on extra-financial reporting from our members. And one of the conclusions of this study is that it shows that there's a need for a mix of mandatory measures and environments and what I would call voluntary on the basis of guidance. And as Paul said, I think the question about mandatory or voluntary is a non-question. The question is when it will happen. And it's in the process of happening. The mandatory aspect of extra-financial reporting is starting all over the world in different countries. Now, it's always on a comply or explain basis. It's usually principle-based. And that's why there's a need to complement that mandatory approach with guidance. And I would sign off the quote you made from your Indian counterpart, is that we are waiting from the business, the investors, and I'm very happy about what Charles has mentioned there and Eric also, but we are waiting from the market and investors and companies to provide us with some input. And I must confess, I'm presently working on the French socially responsible investment label in France. And one of the originalities of this label is that we're working on impact. So we have been asking the investors to provide us with key performance indicators. I must confess that the return we had from the investors is very poor. So, and we're hoping to have some input. I'm straightforward, Paul knows that, but what we're promoting at the group of friends is some sort of mandatory regulatory environment which would favor integrated reporting, to make it short. But it's true that if the market, and both sides, doesn't provide us very quickly with some guidance or KPIs or whatsoever, the regulators will take the leadership. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you. And there's one final point here.
My name is Kemal, Namık Kemal. I'm an independent board advisor at different industries in energy management, real estate, and software as now. I just wanted to add up and ask a question to Mr. Green and Mr. King as well, and you as well. When I was visiting companies at different industries, I observed that each company has different agenda on its own when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to efficiency, such as ISO 14001, which is the environmental management quality, ISO 50001, which is energy efficiency and energy management, ISO 18001, 19001, ISO published too many standards in last 10 years. So when I sit on the other side of the table, when I visit the company, I have been asked by what is FATCA, what is UK Bribery Act, what is B20 regulation, communique, everything. So when it comes to at the end of the meeting, each company, like Mr. Yilmaz stressed out that, each company has different identity, each company has different culture, and to be able to cover all of those reporting for one company, a company has to have a reporting department, and each company has to have chief reporting officer, which I'm seeing that, because each company has right now CXOs, CIOs, CROs, compliance, so there are too many C's, but no Indians. So, who is going to be Indians at this company? This is my question.
Okay.
And my second question, just to keep it short, who is going to be Indians at the companies for C's? And my second question is, the world needs to come to a common understanding. There should be end for integrated reporting, and each country or each regulatory body has to know whatever they are doing from their part of it and other part of it. So because when you look at compliance, code of conduct, FATCA, ISO, so too many reportings, so too many chiefs.
Great, thanks. I'll take this because one of the people who were asked were, I didn't want you to go unmoved, Mervyn, so let's hear from Mervyn on that question.
This is a universal question. I have some sympathy with the last speaker that I don't think there's any genius on planet Earth that can devise a mandatory system which would be adaptable for big companies, small companies, unlisted companies, NGOs, public entities, private entities. And that's why what we have developed is a framework. It's not a standard. Because the company is going to tell its story of what the state of play is inside the company. I believe the answer is, first of all, an enterprise environment which is being created by responsible investment, which we've already spoken about, the energized activism by stakeholders, which is greater than we've ever seen before. So that's the environment. So that, from a responsible investment point of view, great companies having rights issues are being asked critical questions about how they're handling their reporting and their integrated thinking, and they themselves are putting pressure on their suppliers in their supply chain to do, for example, sustainability reporting. So that I think from a mandatory point of view, at most you could have is a regulator, such as Borsa Istanbul, saying that companies listed on the Borsa Istanbul should, on an apply or explain basis, do integrated reporting according to the IRC framework. Then a company can choose not to do an integrated report. But if they do so, they've got that whole environment putting pressure on them. And as I said in my talk, the ultimate compliance officer are the stakeholders. And the stakeholders will very quickly start telling that company, for example, sell their shares, or they will have great difficulty in raising new capital. So I think the question of mandatory to say you must do it and you must comply with these standards, I think it's very difficult to develop that for integrated reporting. But on an apply or explain basis, you, a board, must apply your collective mind to the critical issues of how you carry on your business and how that impacts on the three critical aspects I spoke about. And you should explain that to your stakeholders.
Thank you, Mervyn. Are we allowed to throw? I'm going to move on from that debate because it's been a long debate and I hope useful. I don't think we came up with the ultimate conclusion other than the comply or explain route that Mervyn talked about, but I do think that one of the things we should take account of, and going back to your point, I think, Robin, about the investors, is that don't forget most of the investors, certainly the pension funds, are investing our money. So when Mervyn talks about the stakeholders, he is talking about us. And I think we're in danger sometimes of thinking investors as entities in their own right. And actually what they're doing is investing our money. And so they have a responsibility in their own way. And I know that's Eric's, I've probably stolen your thunder, Eric, because I got most of that from you. But there were three other questions that are outstanding from the opening set of questions. So there was one around the bigger sustainability issues. There was one around the time and the rewards, the short-termism with the CEO and the rewards. And there was one about the kitchen being prepared, you know, so that you've got to get things straight in the business. I don't know if any of those you guys want to pick up on.
Murat Bey asked the kitchen being prepared, the corporate preparation. It should be a top-down thing. I mean, if the CEO or the board doesn't buy this concept, or they just do it for the sake of sort of a compliance, it will not work, because it really needs this internal thinking, what we say. It needs cooperation between the departments. I mean, I'm in charge of the sustainability reporting, and I'm living how difficult it is to, you know, coordinate the process throughout the year. But when it is top-down, then integrated report by definition has to be top-down, and the solution will come. And this being pushed from down makes the corporate culture to buy in this. And when you talk about a reporting process in a corporation, the first department we think is the finance department. They do the management reporting, everything. Yes, supply chain technical departments are preparing the reports, but still they are secondary. But this process will put every function in communication with each other, and has to be starting with the CEO, I would say.
Let me give you an example about how this should go from top to down. We had some discussion with our partner, Nasdaq OMX, discussing about integrated risk management approach in a company, and they gave us an example how they convinced their top management to create an integrated risk management system in Nasdaq OMX. Just to set a fire system, I mean a fire prevention system, that cost $100,000. They showed that if they don't put that fire prevention system, that will cause, in a special case, $1 million loss. So if you show what will be the benefit of integrated reporting to the top management, then you could get their support. Without showing the concrete benefits or concrete losses, you couldn't convince the top management. And another thing that I would like to mention, we should think integrated reporting as an ecosystem. Not only companies, also you should include independent audit companies or rating agencies or professional accountants into this concept. Because if you don't educate or give the relevant information to these companies, then it is difficult to make believe only companies that make happen the integrated reporting. Also the independent audit companies and the other rating agencies should push companies to adapt that concept.
Eric, yeah.
Yeah, I think that in this discussion, three things are extremely important, and you would definitely need that top-down support. But speaking your words, you need the Indians ultimately to do it. But you don't want the Indians to be sitting in a silo and not speaking to the Eskimos, so to speak. And I've seen that happen. It shouldn't be separate, and that's the key about integration. It's about collaboration within a corporate, within a company, and about similar language. And let me give you a very brief example. It's already dating back from 7-8 years ago. And we were talking to a CEO, CFO of a Dutch printing company, and we said, well, as investors, we don't see it adding up. And we have the strategy paragraph here, and we have the risk paragraph here, and they seem totally disconnected from each other. And they said, well, we sort of wrote them together, and they sort of said the right things, And ultimately, the end of the conversation ended, well, yes, it might be a good idea that we use the same word in the risk paragraph and in the strategy paragraph when we actually also mean the same thing. And to me, that was an eye-opener that a lot is about communication and to make it work between the Indians and the Eskimos.
Can I just bring some survey facts to what we're talking about? And it's quite interesting. Mervyn talked about the top line, the staggering 92% of our pilot program companies who had value, improved their value creation process. But there's more in that report that we released back in September. The first is that 79% of the companies said that reporting improved their decision making. Improving their reporting improved their decision making. So these are companies that have been going through a 3-year cycle. 68% said that the reporting gave them a better understanding of the risks and opportunities within the business. And 78% said there was better collaborative thinking, which is what you're talking about, but actually by the board about the goals and targets of the business. So the board was starting to think much more collaboratively, as a, not just necessarily in the management, which is where Mervyn was alluding to. And one of the other statistics that came out was that a survey of investors showed that two-thirds, 63% of investment professionals said that the quality of a company's reporting could have a direct financial impact on its cost of capital. So there are some, they're starting to see in the integrated reporting world some real evidence coming through of the impact that it can have. Enough of an advert, let's go back to the discussion. There were, the other point was around the short-termism and the sort of fix, talking about the short-term life of the CEO. Of course that's got shorter and shorter as the decades have gone on. And I just wonder, how do we fix that, was the question, I think, from there. Anybody got any ideas other than giving them a long-term job, which I'm sure they'd like?
Well, I would like to take a stab at that, but also share with you that I feel this is a very difficult question. And there is perhaps a way to fix it, but it's going to require some dramatic change, I think. Let me first tell you about a study that I first saw presented in last June. It was done by a Dutchman, Professor Kees Kools, perhaps you know him, and he studied bad banks and good banks. He finished the US, he was now working on Europe. And what turned out to be the bad banks, he defined the banks that would have needed state aid, and the good banks, obviously, they didn't need state aid. The bad banks, they performed better than the good banks. The bad banks also positively ticked all the boxes on all kind of governance metrics, earned 2 to 3 times more if you looked at CEO pay, and also had the CEO and the chairman separated. And for the good banks, none of the good banks, I believe, had a CEO-chairman separation. They didn't tick all the governance boxes. So when you look at the outside, you see what looked a good bank turning out to be a bad bank. And on governance metric, what looked a bad bank turned out to be a better investment in the longer term. And now there's another catch, because the best investment strategy, if you just look at financial performance, would be to stay invested in what turned out to be the bad banks. Then just before the crisis hit, when the party was over, so to speak, turn your investment, walk away, and say, well, I'm going to invest in the banks that don't tick all the boxes on governance, but turn out to be better eventually. And that would have been the best investment strategy. Now the struggle for me as an investor if my purpose and my holy purpose is to make the best financial return for you, for your pension, on a day-to-day basis, and I can indeed turn in and out of stocks on a daily basis, then what should I do? And that's a dilemma. And I think many institutions struggle with that dilemma. They dance till the party lasts. Keynes already said it's better to fail conventionally than to succeed unconventionally. But what we need to think about is illiquid investments for the long term, in infrastructure for instance, which really serve your pensions, I think, well, because it has a very stable cash flow. But if you do that in a pension fund context, from the regulatory side you need to fill in separate risk frameworks, you need to take an extra mile, take an extra step to make that happen. And it's also not always reachable for the retail investor. So I think we do have a long way to go there. And another way to go, and I think integrated reporting can help here as well, is that we would say, let's shed a little bit of light on how these pension funds create value beyond just the financial return, and let's see whether they had invested in bad or good banks, and sort of apply integrated reporting to financial institutions, to their funds, to the pension funds, to the investment funds. And we are seeing an initiative in Australia. Perhaps you can talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great segue. Thank you. In Australia, the superannuation funds, if you're not aware, in Australia, the major pension funds, or the superannuation funds, there's been a long time that everybody has had to put money into a superannuation fund from their income, every month, and therefore the superannuation funds are very substantial. And they have got together themselves to create an integrated reporting pension fund group, and what they're doing is they're doing integrated reports themselves for their pension contributors. And in fact, Australia Super, which is Jonathan, Australia Super, which I think is the biggest of the superannuation funds, brought out their integrated report this year for the first time, and the other superannuation funds are working with them and in this network to try to move forward with their own integrated reports. Pension funds in Turkey, I call on the pension funds in Turkey. Right? So if you're not here, then you know who they are, point us in the right direction, because it's a great opportunity to make a difference and get started. So thank you for that. We have Professor Bob Eccles here from Harvard Business School. And Bob, you and some of your colleagues have been doing some evidence-based stuff around investors and things. I wondered if you could share that with us.
Happy to. So, like SEC commissioners, these views are my own. They do not represent the dean of the Harvard Business School. That's my disclaimer. I remember that study presented in Amsterdam. It's a lovely study. It's really very nice. So I think the short-termism thing is important. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg. And I think companies are too easy to point their finger to the short-term capital markets. And the study that Paul's referring to was done by a colleague of mine named George Serafim. And the short version of it is that companies that practice integrated reporting, or a proxy for it, can shape their investor base. So they can shift the proportion of short-term investors to more long-term investors. And as he likes to say, you sort of get the investors you deserve. There's integrated reporting. There's your quarterly conference calls. SAP has a great integrated report. They have a lovely website. I did a study for this Journal of Applied Corporate Finance looking at an ESG briefing, something done between the Global Compact and the PRI. In their ESG briefing, long-term view, financial, non-financial, integrated together. You look at their quarterly conference calls and they sound like everybody else's. It's just about earnings. So I think what companies need to do, and Unilever is the great example people cite on that, if you want more long-term investors, then you have to give investors the information that they need to be long-term. So kind of companies waiting to say, we need more long-term investors before we can do integrated reporting, I think that's a bit of a cop-out. They can use integrated reporting, they can